Today, hyperthreading is not dead. Intel's in huge trouble. AMD's new APU obliterates Intel, and Nvidia's RTX 5090 has been confirmed. Welcome everyone to Gamer Meld. Okay, it's news time, and first up for today, if you've been following the channel, you should know by now that Intel's next generation Arrow Lake desktop CPUs likely won't include hyperthreading. We actually found this out way earlier this year, but then later we found out specifically from Intel that their next gen Lunar Lake architecture does in fact remove hyperthreading. Basically, it's almost certainly not coming to their next gen desktop either. And this is something that seems like it's been a long time coming. Starting with Intel's 12th gen CPUs, they started doing some stuff that got pretty confusing, i.e. they began adding little cores to their CPUs. The issue is that those little cores didn't include hyperthreading, so Intel had to do some pretty wild stuff to try and utilize all of those threads in the correct way. Since then, they've really kind of bashed SMT, especially with their recent Lunar Lake announcement. So the question becomes, well, is SMT still good? Is this something we should still use? AMD definitely seems to be on that side of the fence there, and because of that, Onyx recently ran some tests with AMD's new Zen 5 Ryzen AI 9 HX 370. And what they found is, well, looks like SMT is actually really nice. As you can see right here, it says all 57 benchmarks showed a performance advantage with SMT enabled. On average, the Ryzen AI 9 HX 370 performed 18% faster when using SMT than running the same benchmark without SMT. And some benchmarks performed even better than that. Obviously, 18% is just the average, but they showed as much as a 67% performance advantage. And when it came to power consumption, you can see right here that it was virtually unaffected when they enabled SMT. It says Onyx recorded an average power consumption of 19.27 watts with SMT disabled, but then 19.63 watts with SMT enabled. So we're talking a tiny 2% power impact, yet when it comes to performance, you can get upwards of a 67% performance advantage with an average of 18%. Basically, Intel could have a serious disadvantage with the fact that they removed hyperthreading. Now, I will hold off judgment just because they are releasing something that sort of takes its place in that it doles out tasks to the little cores that it thinks will finish as fast as the bigger tasks. So it doles out smaller tasks to little cores and bigger tasks to the big cores, so they try to make it where they finish those tasks at the same time. Of course, we'll eventually find out, but at least for now, it's not looking good. And next up for today, Intel has really not been having a good go at it, especially given the fact that what I showed in my recent video, Intel is now under investigation for a potential class action lawsuit. Well, looks like things are only getting worse because there's now a second law firm that's looking to sue. But before I get to that, learn how all the hardware I talk about actually works from the place I trust and today's sponsor, Brilliant, the online learning platform that I can honestly say has taught me some really amazing stuff. And not just because they have a ton of great computer science courses like their new one on large language models, but because they teach it in a way that anyone can learn. See, they've brought back hands-on learning. And guess what? It's still the best way to learn just about anything. That means you don't just read about something or talk about it, you actually do it. And I'm just gotta say, they probably have one of the best mobile apps out there. It's intuitive and engaging. I just can't say enough about how great Brilliant is. And all you have to do is visit my link at brilliant.org/gamermeld or just use the QR code right here and you can try out Brilliant for 30 days free. And even better, they're offering my viewers 20% off. Once again, visit brilliant.org/gamermeld. Now back to the story, that second law firm is Kaplan Gore. And as you can see right here, well, they are doing investigation. They have an inquiry form just like the other litigator. And yeah, this is about their 13th and 14th gen processors. It says right here, Intel's 13th and 14th gen CPU damage could be permanent. Well, actually, we heard from Intel that it pretty much is. And this is a reminder for anyone who currently owns a 13th and 14th gen CPUs and you've been having any kind of instability issues, that microcode update that they were discussing does not fix it. that means that your CPU is already damaged. That microcode update is in the hopes that future CPUs won't be damaged. And really quickly, this actually brings me to a story that's recently been going around that originally comes from Puget Systems. And as you can see here, it says that they claim that there's actually a higher failure rate on Ryzen 7000 than 14th gen. And this is true, but sort of. As you can see right here, this is the original story, and this all sort of starts back in 2017. You can see that basically motherboards were shipping out something with, quote, multi-core enhancements that enabled the CPU to basically have the all-core turbo as the single-core turbo frequency. This was essentially an overclock of the CPU, and it pushed it past the official Intel specifications and had negative effects on stability and temperatures. But as they state at Puget Systems, they've always valued stability first, so basically they don't do anything with motherboard vendors that is default. So they made some changes, and that's why failure rates with Puget Systems is better. With that said, as you can see here, 14th gen, these are failure rates per month. It is still very significant for their 14th gen CPUs. Then we go down here, you can see that there's actually a really big difference between the shop caught failures, meaning while it's in shop, they're running tests, they find a failure. It's much higher than when it actually gets out on the field. And then when we look at failure rates compared to AMD, you can see their 11th gen is definitely the worst, but 14th and 13th gen, yes, they are more than 12th gen, but it's actually not as much as AMD's Ryzen 7000. So yes, in this case, that is true, but with more context, you can see that Puget Systems doesn't take their CPUs, doesn't take the motherboard, and then use default settings. So you really quickly might think, oh, well, that means what Intel said is actually true. It is, in fact, due to motherboards, but as I've said, this was also the case for multiple generations before it. And of course, Intel could have forced motherboard vendors to not use any kind of settings above what they state. There's really lots of things that I do think makes this ultimately fall on Intel. But not only that, they do make a good point that if it is true that 14th gen CPUs will continue to have increasing failure rates over time, this could end up being a much bigger problem as time goes by. Basically, while at least in this case, it is true that Intel's 14th gen is failing less than AMD's Ryzen 7000, that's because Puget Systems doesn't run with default settings. So ultimately, I think the real test would be a large sample of these CPUs tested at default settings before we could really say, oh, it's worse or better than AMD's own Ryzen 7000. And next up, we have some awesome new benchmarks that were originally shared in a video by Tech Epiphany. And basically, what they do is, you can see right here, they took AMD's new Ryzen AI 9 HX370, they took it in an Asus VivoBook S16 OLED, and then they tuned it down from the default 60 watt setting all the way down to 17 watts. Then they compared it to an Intel Core Ultra 7 155H at 28 watts plus, and then they ran some gaming benchmarks. Now, for those who may not really be following along, basically what this is a comparison of the integrated GPU on AMD's new APUs versus Intel's at 17 watts versus 28. And get this, AMD's iGPU didn't just sort of beat Intel's, it completely crushed it. As you can see right here, the 17 watt delivered 50 to 70 FPS in Tomb Raider, which is a 40 to 60% gain over the Arc Xe LPG iGPU running at 28 watts. Moving on down here in Hellblade, we see that AMD's 890M iGPU gave closer to a 20 to 25% performance uplift over Intel's iGPU. Then we have Cyberpunk 2077, which ran 35 to 50 FPS, offering a 40 to 50% lead over Intel's Meteor Lake. Lastly, we move down here with God of War, which tested at 1080p, and you can see it got around 40 FPS, which is around 30 to 40% faster than Intel's iGPU. Basically, AMD's new APU doesn't just sort of spank Intel's, it completely destroys it, and it does it at far less wattage. And lastly for today, while we've been talking about Nvidia's upcoming RTX 5000 series, we obviously weren't exactly sure if that was going to be the name, and we didn't really have any real hard indication that they were actually coming. Well, it looks like both of those have been answered, because as you can see right here in a new listing on Amazon, the new X Silent Edge Platinum 850 watt fanless power supply actually proves it. You can see right here, this is the Cooler Master X Silent Edge Platinum 850 fanless ATX 3.1 fully modular PSU, and it actually supports GPUs, the RTX 4090, as well as the 5090. And while some may say, oh, that could just be a typo or something, I really don't think so, just because that would mean they'd have to mess up not only the 5, but also the 9, because it already says 4090, so it would say like 4090 and 4080. So I really don't think that's the case here, and that would of course mean that Nvidia's next gen is the RTX 5000 series, given this does end up being correct, though of course if anyone would know, besides Nvidia, it would likely be someone like Cooler Master. And given the fact that they're already talking about the 5090, putting labels on PSUs about the 5090, it is likely coming and coming soon. So while that does it for today, which GPU are you most excited about with next gen? Let me know down in the comments below. And don't forget to try out Brilliant at brilliant.org/gamermelt. And as always, have a great day.